Welcome to a new episode of the Focus Bee Show. I'm here with Brenden Kumarasamy, the founder of MasterTalk YouTube channel. Brenden supports entrepreneurs to achieve great results in terms of mastering communication and public speaking. Thank you for being here today, Brenden.
Of course, it's my pleasure, Katie. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I was wondering, Brenden, why did you get interested in the fields of public speaking and communication in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I went to university, I used to do these things called case competitions. So think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing football or, footy or cricket or rugby or some other sport, I did presentations for fun. So since you're from Sweden, like I know a lot of people from Lund, and the reason is because a lot of those people, like from Lund University, for those who don't know that's in Sweden, they spend $10,000 a year, okay, to fly out to Montreal to give PowerPoint slides. That was actually one of my first exposures to case competition. This is a very serious thing, but anyways, for 3 years, I presented hundreds of times and coached dozens of people on communication. And the reason was to get a job in the corporate world. So I was like, oh, I need to get a job in this field. But then after I graduated from university and then I got my job, I just asked myself, how do I make a difference in the world? How do I contribute more to the society? That's what I had the idea for MasterTalk because I realized that nobody was sharing communication information for free through video format on a consistent basis. So I started making videos in my mother's basement. One thing led to another, and here we are today.
Amazing. It's always interesting to hear why people get interested in these fields. I'm wondering, what's your input in terms of how mastering the art of communication can have an impact on business performance?
Right. So the way that we need to think about this in addition to business performance is this idea that communication is everything that you do, right? It's the way that you talk to your loved ones. It's the way that you get dinner with them. It's the way that you negotiate deals. It's every single interaction of your life. So once you realize that communication is necessary to the quality of your life, it's a lot easier to tie it back to the business performance. So from a life perspective, if your communication skills got better, it's just easier for you to communicate with everyone in around you and the circles around you, and you can develop more meaningful relationships from that. But from a business performance perspective, communication allows you to scale your ideas to millions of people rather than just hundreds of people. Think of it like this. If you got a great product or service and you live in a small village or a small city within the world and you communicate it to that small group, I mean, you can still make a great impact in the world. It's a small customer base. But if you're able to communicate through video, communicate in a podcast, share an idea to a lot more people, you're going to reach a lot more customers and do very well for yourself.
Very true. And I also like what you said about how communication is essentially everything from the way we communicate in the relationships in our lives, and business performance is just one aspect in which it has an influence and an impact. It's also interesting to note how by tweaking and changing the way we communicate, the impact that this can have in both our life and our business. I'm wondering, when you started doing this at university, what sort of results did you obtain in your life and, well, business at the time, studies, once you started to master this art?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, and this is what people will find with their communication skills as well, is as you get better at one area of communication, you will start to get better at all of them. So when I started, I was really bad at all of them, right? I wasn't very good at communication. And then after I got really good at presentations, so the effects of that is I would get better grades at school, I would do better at competitions, but then because I got better at presentations, I started getting better at conversations, right? So it would be a lot more easier for me to listen, be more empathetic to what else somebody else is saying. And then after that, it just started transitioning to everything else. Like, for example, 6 months ago, I've never been on a podcast show. But then after a couple of months of being on a couple, because, I can't really fly out anymore to conferences, to speak or to interact with people, then my ability as a podcast guest and you as a podcast host, I would imagine, increases a lot. Why? Because the format of that communication style remains the same. So yeah, it's definitely benefited a lot, and I get it. I rarely get into fights these days, so that's a good thing.
Yes, it probably comes partly from the empathy side. It's interesting to see how much we can change from learning these skills. And also, I'm curious, how do you feel it impacted your confidence? Because being able to speak in public and being able to communicate effectively, I mean, the correlation is huge. How did you feel the difference?
Right. So the way that I think about confidence, it's definitely gone up over the years. But I think what would be great is to talk about this idea of where does confidence even come from? At the end of the day, Katie, confidence comes from two areas. One's the obvious one we already know, right? Preparation. If you just do more, you'll be better, right? As you do more episodes, the reason you get better as a communicator is because, well, it's always an intro. It's always asking questions to the guest, and then it's like, okay, thank you for coming on. But it's always the same thing, right? So because of that, you get better really quickly. So preparation, simple. But the second thing that not many people talk about, and no, it's not drinking a glass of water, and no, it's not breathing, and no, it's not power posing your way to success. Like yeah, none of that works. In my opinion, it's having a belief system. Why are you even giving this presentation to begin with? What are you trying to achieve with this presentation? To give you a personal context, I started MasterTalk when I was 22, and I started coaching senior executives of big companies when I was 23. Who in the world am I to teach all this information to people? Where did that confidence come from? It came from preparation. Sure, I presented a lot, for sure. But the second component is a lot more important. I had a point of view on how the world should be. I thought it was crazy that younger generations of individuals didn't have access to free communication tools to communicate their ideas to the world. And I knew for the quality of the content I put on YouTube that I needed financial resources to make that happen. So it wasn't this, oh yeah, I'm super confident with coaching executives. No, 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 I was scared to death. What happened was I need to figure this out so I can use the money that they are giving me and then reapply that cash flow or that income to making the videos better for people who can't afford me. So the question you need to ask yourself to be more confident is a lot simpler than you think. The question is, how would the world change if you were an exceptional communicator?
Very nice. I wanted to leave it even longer pause for it to sort of sink in. I think there's a few things that you said here that I really love. I love how you have this sort of Robin Hood approach of getting the money from the executive and delivering to the
I like
world.
that. That's very true. Very accurate.
But I think in general, this is a very sort of healthy system in terms of being an entrepreneur, getting money from corporate resources and helping them on some level. And then this gives us enough money and freedom to provide free content, such as this podcast, such as your YouTube channel. So there's so many free ways to help people and then have an impact. But I also love the other point that you mentioned, which is about the belief system. And this makes me think of, Simon Sinek with Connect with Your Why, because if your why is really strong, it's not just that it gives you that confidence, it's it gives you that extra sort of push and desire, and then that will help you confront your fears. What are your thoughts on this?
I completely agree. I think what I always say about public speaking, and that's why I'm so passionate about it, anyone can master the skill. Like just to give you an idea of my story, Katie, like when I grew up in a city like Montreal, for those who don't know, French is a required language in the city. My parents looked at me and they said, "Well, buddy, you got to learn the language, so we're going to put you in a French education system." So not only was I uncomfortable in presentations, I had to present in a language I didn't even know. So when I was in grade one or grade two, I'd look at the crowd and say, bonjour? And that was my life for most of it. Obviously now I'm grateful because I do speak French, but I think the thing I want to push is this idea that if I could master communication, because I had a belief system. It was competitions at the beginning, and then it turned into MasterTalk, which is what the belief system is now. But for other people, it doesn't need to be a YouTube channel. It doesn't need to be this big podcast. All it needs to be is something that you care about, that you care to teach. Here's a classic example. Julia works at a 9 to 5 bank. She comes up to both of us and goes, "Well, Brendan, what am I supposed to be passionate about here? Like my projects are changing, great. Like what do I do?" So my response to Julia is always the same. What do you do outside of work? And then she might say, "Well, I don't know, like I coach marketing to a group of teenagers every month for a kids leadership program that I'm doing pro bono." So for those who know, pro bono means for free. And then I would say, "Okay, why don't you make a presentation, the best presentation that you can on marketing? But guess what? You can use that presentation over and over again because even if your content won't change, the kids will, right? They won't be kids anymore. The new kids will replace them and your presentation will get better." That's the secret sauce to public speaking.
Yes, interesting. And I'm wondering if you could say what are the different areas of communication? Because you mentioned earlier that you worked on the different areas. And so I'm sort of curious, maybe for the audience, they're also wondering what are the different areas of communication?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, I'll probably miss a lot of them because I'm not very academic. But what I'll say, then I'll give coaching on how to do this best. I would say there's like three main areas you want to focus on. There's a lot more than three, but I think these three will are the easiest to focus on, like to really see. Because as you can probably tell, communication is very vague. So I make it my life's calling to try and make it as concrete as possible. So one side of it is presentations. Like how do you present in a way that's very conveying? Number two is conversations. How do you maintain a conversation in a way that makes sense and in a way that drives performance? And then the third thing would be, okay, now that I know how to communicate all these things, how do I communicate in a way to negotiate, to persuade, and to influence? So now that I know how to talk to people, now that I know how to speak to people, how do I use empathy and different psychological tricks to speak in a way that makes sense? So I'll give you an example with what I'm doing right now, which is called mirroring. When I'm on a podcast show, couple of things tend to happen. I'll give you like three in particular. One, the host turns on the camera, like I get on the show and they go, "Brenden, it's so great for you to be here. We're so excited that you're here." And then I reply with, "It's so great to be here, Nick. I'm really excited to be here too." Notice how I'm mirroring the energy of that individual. But the opposite, you're in the middle, but the opposite is also true. "Hey, Brendan, it's so great to see you." And I go, "Hey, Paula. How's it going? Is this your first podcast show?" She's like, "Yeah, but I did a lot of research on you and I'm really." Don't worry, let's take it one question at a time. Notice how the way that I mirrored is completely different. And obviously now I'm in the middle because you're kind of in the middle of those two areas. But the idea is simple. Master one of these skills and you'll slowly master all of them. Let's focus on presentations because I think that's the easiest one to teach. Okay. There's a method I have called puzzle. Right. So what puzzle means is that public speaking is a lot like a jigsaw puzzle, Katie. You know those 1,000-piece puzzles you can do with your family in Sweden? You kind of put them together. I guess now with COVID, we can't really do much else, so we might as well make puzzles. So if I asked you, Katie, if you're working on these these puzzles, which pieces would you start with first?
I'm not sure I know which puzzles you're talking about. Maybe you could describe them.
Of course, I'm happy to. You know those jigsaw puzzles, like 1,000-piece puzzles? You buy
Those
them at a toy
puzzles.
store.
Ah,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
always start with the outline boundary.
Awesome, awesome. So it's always the outline boundary, right? Because it's easier to get. So now the question is, why don't we do that in public speaking? We have a presentation at work or in business or at school. So what do? We start with the middle pieces first. We start shoving a bunch of content. We get to the presentation. We get to the last slide. It sounds something like this. Yeah, so thanks. That's probably 97% of presentations I listen to. So what's the strategy? It's actually super simple. Treat your presentations like a jigsaw puzzle. Start with the edges first. Do your introduction 50 times, not 5 times, not 3 times, 50 times. It actually won't take you that long, probably an hour. Same thing with the conclusion. What's a great movie with a terrible ending? A terrible movie. Same thing, 50 times. After 2 hours of practice, because nobody does their intro or their conclusion 50 times, you'll start to look at yourself and go, wow, I'm really good at this presentation thing. This thing's really easy. Then you tackle the middle. But much like jigsaw puzzles, who wants to do a puzzle on their own? Right? It's like nobody does that on their own. Do it with your friends, do it with your family, right? I still, as a professional speaker today, I still get help from my friends to do slides and how to do presentations. Something to think about.
Yes, I think the really important part of mastering your conclusion, I think a lot of the times we do work on the introduction. I say we as all humans, but I think a lot of people work on the introduction because they're nervous. And so they want the introduction to be good. And then they spend so long on the middle part that, like you said, they arrive at the conclusion. And I think especially people who aren't used to public speaking or maybe slightly ill at ease, they just want to get off the stage. They want to get it done. This is over. And so there's a sort of slight panicky moment. Oh, I think I've done 2, 3 sentences, run away. And like you said, it's such a shame, especially if the presentation is good, to finish on a sort of sour note. I'm also wondering, how do you help people that have stage fright? Because I think this is extremely common. I'm thinking of these poor people having to do work presentations that are so nervous. And I think it's very human and normal, this sort of fear of being open and, people are scared of being judged or how they're perceived. So how do you help people overcome this? Surely this is probably one of the biggest obstacles you come across.
Absolutely. And before I go forward, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Is it Katie? It's probably not Katie, right?
Yes, it is Katie. I
It
mean,
is.
you
Okay.
can pronounce it Katie or Katie because I grew up French British and you speak French too. So in
Yeah.
France, all my friends call me Katie, and all my British
Oh.
parents and family and friends call me Katie. So it's fine. You're
Oh,
doing a good job.
gotcha. See, that's a good example. Being customer obsessed, focused on your audience. But yeah, okay, makes sense. So the idea with the fear of public speaking is simple. The fear needs to always lose to the message. What does that mean? The fear is always going to be there, all the time, right? It's always going to be there, even for me. But the difference is that if the fear and the message were in a boxing match, the message always should win, right? So for me, it's not really about this idea of how do you get rid of fear, but rather how do you make sure that your message is so important that your fear always loses, right? So think of it like this. Brene Brown, who's a very well-known speaker in the world, doesn't like to present. She's very upfront about it. She actually hates to present. When she started giving presentations on the TED stage, this was a couple of years ago, right? She just said, no, I'm a PhD in social work. I do research. I do numbers. I don't want to present this. So why? As a very introvert, she's very good, by the way. It's not bad or anything. But why did she make the decision to present anyways? Because she realized the following. I'm doing a lot of research, and no one's going to read my research, and most people can't invest money or buy a book. Most people just don't read books. So the only way for her to reach those people, to reach those millions of people, is to do a TED Talk, to do a YouTube video in the same way I do it with MasterTalk, because I know if I just wrote a book, it won't really help that much people. It will help some people depending on who reads it. Well, that's the point. You need to get very clear on your message. If you get very clear on your message, right, whether it's having a better relationship with your family, whether it's starting a YouTube channel, it is only in that moment that you're going to be able to say, okay, now my fear loses. And that is how you move forward.
It's when the message really matters and you focus more on the people listening and the audience and on yourself, then you forget about the fear. And I love Brené Brown, by the way. And this is interesting because I was also going to mention how important it is to still be vulnerable. So I was wondering what your take was on how to manage our vulnerability as a strength. Because when you go up on stage, for example, you don't want to be sort of overly confident, so you want to remain humble. So it's like a perfect balance, I find, of vulnerability. You don't want to eliminate the vulnerability that you just don't care what the message will come across like, but you don't want to be too vulnerable that you feel really terrified at the idea of going out there. So finding that right level of vulnerability.
Right, and that's a very good question. So the way that I think about it is that communication works like a spectrum. At the beginning, you might not want to share your story with people, right? You're going to look at people and say, maybe I shouldn't share this one. Maybe I shouldn't share that one. And a good example is Seth Godin. Seth Godin never shares a lot of his personal stories at all. Like, and he's a very famous speaker. He kind of just says, no, I'm going to tell you this tacky thing, but I'm never going to talk to you about my family. That's just the way that he thinks about it. So the way that I think about it is start with the things in your life that you're comfortable speaking so that your confidence as a speaker goes up, and tie that vulnerability to the impact that you can make. I'll use myself as an example. So when I started keynoting, I was super insecure. The reason is because I was doing communication workshops for people who are double my age in many cases. So I'd look at them and just go, whoa, like, this is really weird. Like, why am I doing this? So what did I do to compensate for that insecurity? Well, I started gloating about all my accomplishments. It's the only way for them to take me serious. At least I thought, anyways. Oh yeah, I worked with this client. I did this CEO. I'm the personal coach of the queen of. No, I'm kidding. You know what I mean? Like, it just pushing. But what I realized over time was that, wait a second. When I started talking to 15-year-olds and giving workshops to 15-year-olds, they would ask me a question. They'd be like, "What's a CEO?" You know, or a 7-year-old who comes up to me like, what's a chief executive? I don't understand this. And I just went, oh, right. Why am I mentioning all these things? And then I realized what my goal was as a speaker was. It wasn't to teach people communication. It was to convince people that they can do it. Right? That's very different. So what's the best way of convincing people to do something? Is it through statistics, numbers? Maybe. But the best way for me was to talk about my own vulnerability as a speaker. If I share with the world that I was a terrible speaker most of my life, I presented in a language I didn't even know, which was French. I know it now, but if I could master communication, if I could get over my fear of public speaking, why can't you? Right? So it's that vulnerability piece in the idea that I had to share with the world that allowed me to scale the idea. Because it goes from, well, Brenden, you're pretty amazing. I'm going to put you on a pedestal and not try and be you, versus, oh, this guy is sitting on a mattress and he doesn't cut his hair and he's just a normal guy. If he could master communication, I can too. That's why I'm very thoughtful about how I show up on podcasts. Because I know on my YouTube video, I look very fancy, right? So I try and keep that middle ground. So going back to the ideas that you have to share with the world, ask yourself the following idea rather. How does the vulnerability of your own experiences impact your ideas? And pretty much all the time, it's going to impact those ideas in a positive way.
Yes, and I think it's wonderful to sort of be able to show other people that we're not born public speakers and we're not born, communication experts or any other things. But a lot of people feel they need to have a natural ability, a natural inclination towards speaking languages or being athletic or being a speaker. And it's really great to have examples of people who began like you did, and there are many other examples in a way where they were very nervous, where they were at ease, shy. Some people were actually terrified of public speaking, as some of the best speakers. I mean, I love the example you gave of Brene Brown. And even some speakers and actors still like have huge stage fright, and they do it professionally on a regular basis. And I think this helps everyday people that either want to become speakers or just improve their communication to feel that maybe they can also do it. If all these amazing speakers or still have stage fright and do a great job, they can also do it. To have a bit of a tangent here, I'd like to discuss the link between mindfulness and speaking, because my podcast is all about the importance of high performance and mindfulness. And I really feel there's an important tie here. So if you could say a few words about how you feel that mindfulness and public speaking are related.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. There is one habit that I recommend that nobody talks about on shows that drives me crazy. Right? And this ties in with high performance mindfulness, which eventually makes you an exceptional communicator. Because at the end of the day, if you know what you stand for, if you know your value system, if you know what you believe in, it's going to be easy to find your idea that you want to share with the world. Okay, so what's the habit? Is it working out, getting exercise, eating yogurt? A lot of people talk about this, so I'm not going to mention those things. The habit is ask yourself one hard question about life every single day. I'm of the belief, Ketsi or Katie, that the quality of your life is solely determined by the quality of the questions that you dare to ask yourself. What made me successful, relatively so? Not because I'm more special, not because I'm more important, because I wrote my own funeral speech when I was 21. I got very clear on the destination of what my life should be. And I'll give you some examples of questions. What are you pretending not to know? If you had all the money in the world, how would you spend your time? And if you died tomorrow, what would your funeral speech say about you? I asked myself a question like this every single day until I realized that all of the rules in our society and how society is run is all made up, right? Who invented the rule that we had to have 2.5 kids, not 2 kids, but 2.5 kids, and then have a white picket fence because we're not allowed to choose the color of that fence? We had to have a big house, even if we don't really want to pay a big mortgage. And we need to have 2 cars, Katie, not one. Because if we have 2 cars, that's how it makes us look more important and grandiose to society. Who made up these rules? And then you realize that none of the rules make sense, and then you start to make your own rules. And when you start to make your own rules, you can prioritize what's important to your life. And for me, it just ended up being communication coaching and starting this weird YouTube channel purely on communication and public speaking tips.
I love what you said about the quality of the questions determine the quality of your life. Tony Robbins says this a lot. He says a lot of other things related to this. And obviously, also an important aspect in what you just said is it makes us feel uncomfortable because those are difficult questions. So essentially, also what you're doing on top of redefining the rules is you're willing to be uncomfortable every day. And so this means that when you have a business opportunity or something that comes up in your life that will make you feel uncomfortable again, you're used to it. Your mind has accepted this is a daily thing. I'm asking all these hard questions like what will be my funeral speech will be like. Oh, I can deal with this other uncomfortable situation. And I'd also like to highlight that question you said, which is what am I pretending not to know? This one I never heard, and I'm definitely making a personal note of it. And I will ask myself this question this week. Why am I pretending not to know? And linked to this, probably an interesting point would also be to question our belief systems and to come back to that mindset, fix and growth mindset, and maybe something along the lines of, what do I believe I am not capable of doing? And it's not true, so sort of questioning ourselves, yeah, questioning our limits and our boundaries.
Absolutely. I got hundreds. I'll send you them after the show.
Nice. Okay, questions are amazing because when you ask a question, whether it's in an interview, so me asking you, or whether we ask ourselves, we look for the answer. So if you're asking yourself, why is life wonderful? You're going to look for why it's wonderful.
I agree. You're really touching on a cool point here, which is this idea of asking yourself empowering questions rather than disempowering ones. Like this idea of like, why is life so bad? Versus saying, what is life trying to tell me? Right? Or what is life trying to get me to do? Right? Or rather, my favorite one, this is my favorite one because I hate passions. We can talk about that too. Is this idea of don't ask yourself what you're passionate about unless you know what that passion is. I think the better question is what does the world need you most to do right now and why? That will get you very laser focused. When I was 12, the answer was not be a YouTuber. I thought that was for rich white people, honestly, right? For me, it was just get a job in the corporate world. My mom's a factory worker. My dad's a factory worker. I don't want them to work in factories anymore. Let me make some money so I can retire the both of them. So get a job in accounting. Then I worked really hard. I went to business school, did all these competitions, and then I said, oh, I work at PwC. Life is good. How about I get a job in technology consulting? So then I did all these interviews. I did all these things, and then I landed a job at IBM, right? And then I retired both of them. But then after that, I said, what does the world need me most to do right now and why? I wasn't in poverty anymore. I was pretty safe at this point. And that's when the idea for MasterTalk came. Because if I never made the decision to do any of those things, I wouldn't even have the expertise to be on this show or to do MasterTalk. So that's why I implore people to do. Make decisions. Don't rely on passions.
Yes, I think that's great, especially since a lot of people either can't find their passion or they struggle to define it. And this is more looking at what already do you have as strengths, what are you already good at, or you have a natural inclination towards, and then using that to help the world. So I think that's a really wonderful touch to finish on. Brenden, where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely, Katie. So for those who want to get in touch, Master Talk in one word is the best way of going about that. You can just type Master Talk in the YouTube search engine and you'll find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Brenden. Thank you for sharing all of this.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.